Welcome everyone to our cosy wee hideaway at the Saltire Society. My name's Jim Tuff, I work for the Society, and I'm just going to introduce this wee event. So firstly, thanks for coming along. This is part of our 80th anniversary programme for the Saltire Society, and you'll see that on the wee tote bags we've given you, and the programme for the 80th anniversary is in there, as well as, you're very lucky, a free book of poetry that we produced recently in partnership with the Scottish Poetry Library. So the idea of our 80th anniversary was to do some special things, and inspired by Stevie Marsden, who's sitting quietly at the back, who was working with us doing a PhD study of our literary awards. Stevie had the idea of doing an online festival, and then she promptly got a real job and left us. And so we were very lucky to get Laura and Heather, who are the two guys that have run this festival for us, and they're doing a brilliant job, and we really appreciate it. So the SCOTLITFEST, I keep trying to say it's Scotland's first online festival. I'm told it's not, so I'll say it's the biggest. Does that work?
Yes.
That's okay then. So this event is going to be part of that programme. So what's recorded here today will be screened on Sunday the 26th at 6 p.m. And so we're delighted to have Saltire Book of the Year winner in 2002, Janice Galloway, for Clara. Just yesterday.
In some ways, but in some ways.
And last year, Janice was also shortlisted for the Book of the Year for that nice publication that's sitting on her knee, Jellyfish. And Janice will be in conversation with a one-person literary phenomenon, that is Peggy, who runs Literary Dundee, basically, amongst many other things. So without further ado, I'll hand over to you guys. And thanks very much for doing this with us. We appreciate it.
Thank you for the invitation, Jim.
Thank you.
Lovely.
Thank you, how lovely to see you. I feel like I'm sort of vibrating with excitement to be here with Janice Galloway. It's always an absolute pleasure to be in conversation or
It's the first time for everything.
No. I'm going to give you a wee intro to Janice's work, just in a wee bit more depth. And then the format will be Janice is going to read us a story or a bit of a story.
Oh, it has to be
bit of a story.
7 minutes, so that'll have to be a bit of a
7 minutes worth of story. Then we'll have a chat up here, and then we'd love it if you would come in with your questions and comments, because what could be nicer than that? So Janice Galloway first burst onto the scene with The Trick is to Keep Breathing in 1989. She's published many books, and we'll just call them books because we're going to get into that, classifications and what that means. But some others are Foreign Parts, Clara, This Is Not About Me, All Made Up, and most recently in 2015, Jellyfish. Some accolades that she's received, Jim mentioned a couple. The Mind Book of the Year, the E.M. Forster Award, McVitie's Award for Book of the Year, the Saltire Award's been mentioned already, the Scottish Mortgage Investment Trust Book of the Year, Non-Fiction Book of the Year, and actually you're up for the Sunday Herald Culture Award for Author of the Year, which is very exciting.
Yeah.
Hooray!
I'm a bit stuck for what to say because I only heard about that about an hour ago.
Oh, fabulous.
And it's a new thing.
I think we could do a spontaneous round of applause.
Is it a new thing or am I just stupid?
Inaugural, yeah.
Yeah, it is a new thing. Thank you for saving my blushes. I've never heard about it before.
It's exciting. And I'm just going to, before Janice reads, I'm going to finish on a quote that I really like, which is Galloway is a literary endoscopist. She gets beneath the surface of life and exposes the nerves. Writing has rarely been so visceral. So I'm just going to ask you again to give her a warm welcome before she reads.
I feel that I have somewhat been set up to eviscerate you now, which is daunting, to put it mildly. This is the longest story in the book, so 7 minutes of this is just to give you a bit where it turns. There are 2 corner turns, and the second turn will just... Oh, it is intended to leave you wondering what will happen next so that you rush out. And why? It's called Distance, the last one in the book. I was the Jura Fellow in Writing, which basically was just the best gig ever. If you ever get the chance to apply for this, please do. You are housed opposite the distillery. I don't drink, but it's populated by a lot of very attractive men who work 24/7. And I work 24/7. And I don't sleep very well, so when I was working late, somebody would be there with his top off, waving, because it's hot and just waving over at me. And it was a kind of glorious experience, because there was nothing expected of me, apart from working on something and coming to terms with Jura. And several of the stories that I wrote there weren't written because I was there, it was afterwards, because when I was there, simply the experience of being there. If you've never been, it's one of these places with, I think there are over 8,000 deer and 802 of a population. And recently somebody had a baby, so it'll be 803 of a population. But at the same time, animals outnumbering human beings to that extent is my idea of good odds. And it was that kind of place. Everywhere you went, you would find the teenage pheasants. You knew they were teenage pheasants because they were hanging about at a bus stop as though they were looking for fags, you know, that kind of thing. Or deer, constantly deer. And this is based on that. The deer come down to the road at night, slipping through the bracken just before dusk. By sundown, more beasts than seemed natural would reach the tarmac, sure-footing their way across the narrow beach. They were there that first night, pallid in the headlights as she rolled off the ferry, turning to watch her as she slowed to a stall. Every night since, using petrol it would probably have been wiser to save, she'd come back to see them doing it again. They paid little attention to her, just went about their business, picking their way to the sand, their young close behind them. Sometimes they turned and sniffed the air, then ambled slowly on. Something was drawing them. Maybe it was the dark. Her too. They paid little attention to her, just went about their business, picking their way to the sand, their young close behind them. Sometimes they turned and sniffed the air, then ambled slowly on. Something was drawing them. Maybe it was the dark. Her too. But the thing about the deer was they didn't judge, they did not speculate about her motives, they simply were. And so they decided was she. Gentle things made bolder by the dying light. They met her eye to eye, their pupils huge and absorbent in the dark. This was their element, not hers. But for now, she had permission to stay. Martha had not expected to be so struck by any of it. That the island would be beautiful she had taken for granted. That was what Scottish islands were, weren't they? Heather and bracken, tumble-down crofts, highland cows, solitary eagles hovering over rugged grandeur. And water. Streams to waterfalls, crashing waves, a lot of water. That the place was entirely as perfect as expected surprised her nonetheless. Even late in the year, the lushness was heart-stopping. A small continent of greens and russets, clumps of bramble, fern and rush grass, fringed by seaweed, scrub and scree. The window of the hotel bedroom framed a tethered boat that never seemed to move at all. Red hull twinned against the mirror surface. Most mornings there was a seal twisting its way between the scattered rocks of the small isles. That she could not identify the birds that hung like dancers over the harbour didn't matter a bit. They'd be there tomorrow and every day after that, whether she knew what they were or not. They were utterly indifferent to her. She was harmless. Peter was 3 when he split his head on a sheet glass table. She'd been serving soup from a pot on the stove, heard him pattering closer in his socks, and from instinct looked up. The whole thing played before her eye in mere seconds in the shiny backboard of the cooker. There he was, running towards the table, laughing, then without warning, a dreadful crack like gunshot, as the child stopped in his tracks, raised his hands to his face, and opened his mouth wide. At first there wasn't any noise, then he crumbled to the floor as the howling started, the pain. Kneeling, trying to understand what it was, she saw the blood, like paint from the lip of a can, thick and scarlet. A towel pressed to his forehead soaked as soon as it touched, blood forcing up through the fibres, as though the wound beneath had been made by cutlass. She cradled his face, hands running like a butcher's, as his eyes rolled and the screaming just went on and on and on. If he was dying, she thought, bracing his little body tight, smiling down at him out of sheer terror. If he was bleeding to death, her duty was to reassure him. As she pressed the right numbers slowly, carefully, into the phone with one hand, the other clutched him close, not letting go. As she spelled out their address to the operator, her voice clear, she kept her gaze steady, point to point on his. He would not be afraid because she was afraid. That was important to remember. He would not be afraid. It was the least she could do. "It's all right," she crooned, as he shook, barely containable between her arms. "I'm here." He rattled against her chest. "Let Mummy take it," she whispered. "Let me take it instead." After it soothed her that he could not have heard her, it would have been impossible for him to have heard what she had said. At hospital, of course, things were more detached. Cuts to the forehead, the nurse said, they always barked worse than they bit. She meant there was always a lot of blood and often no lasting damage. She was implying that Martha had overreacted. They stitched him back together so gently that he fell asleep the minute it was finished. Next afternoon he woke woozy and heavy-lidded, but more or less just Peter. The table survived with only a minor crack, and 3 stained towels were thrown away as beyond repair. Peter's torn skin mended behind a cat-in-the-hat plaster, and everything fell to rights again. Everything except Martha. Everything except Martha. It started with dreams, then it got much worse.
We were going to do a kind of "This is your life in books," Janice Galloway, but since we're and start right at the very beginning with the trick. But I think since we're on jellyfish, we'll go there first, shall we?
Sure.
And I just want to ask you more about the David Lodge quote that you chose to run along with this collection. Literature is mostly about having sex and not much about having children. Life's the other way round.
Yep.
Could you unpack that a bit for us and why you chose that?
It could be my age, but that resonated. I was born in 1955. Yes, really. And I remember it vividly. And it was extraordinary how much about it was as though sex had just been invented. You know, and of course that. But there was this bizarre thing that sex, as it was represented in novels and on the television, and the sudden freeing of Lady Chatterley, God bless her, who'd been locked away for so many years. You know, there was all sorts of stuff sort of seemed to be part of that time. And one assumed that sex was a terribly, terribly important part of life. In a way, my mother had never thought it an important part of life. She saw it as a kind of obligation. And it made you pregnant. Who wants that? The pill. Ladies and gentlemen, the pill is what made the vast difference to our attitudes to sex. And it showed in the books. It really showed in the books. It showed on the TV. It showed in the Dracula movies, for God's sake. Have you ever seen the Hammer Horror House ones from that period? All the vampires. What's the first thing you notice?
All men, aren't they?
No. Vampirella.
Oh.
Think.
Boobs?
Yeah.
Yeah, enormous breasts fed by blood. It's apparently the best way to get them, ladies. What you do is you sidle up to an unsuspecting chap, and mostly the female vampires, for some reason, were always biting men. And it was the male vampires who were up to bite women. If you wanted to give something a frisson, a little edge of lesbianism, it would be the female vampire biting the heroine before the chap runs in and sorts everything out. But that was the kind of perspective that I had on what life was about, which, I mean, really, that's why we were all screwed in the 60s and 70s. We were a mess because we didn't actually know how to prioritise things or prioritise life. We thought entertainment and being young was the thing that mattered. You were changing the world somehow. The contraception helped a lot. But I guess I didn't get pregnant till I was 36. Because my mother had always said, don't get pregnant, hen, weans ruin your life. Thanks, Mum. And I believed her. She had experience of this thing, I didn't. And after having had my son, it is not widely regarded as a feminist thing to say, but it's a true thing for some women. I suddenly grasped that this was really, really important. This was probably one of the most important and useful things I was ever likely to engage with. And it still is. He's 23 now, and he's relatively normal considering the kind of stress I put on him as a kid. But it was the most extraordinary experience, and I started then to look at. It tends not to happen. You don't really notice how many pregnant women there are in the world till you're pregnant yourself or until your partner is pregnant. It's one of these things you begin to notice that that is a facet of life, and it kind of draws you in, becomes all-encompassing for a certain period of time. And it was only when that happened, heading towards my 40s, that I realised that this was actually the thing that the world was about. This entirely, progeny is entirely the thing that keeps the race going. And somewhere in our heads is programmed how, well, in our DNA, is actually how important this thing is. But there were so few books, and the number of times women would come up to me at events and they'd say, have you ever written a story about a single parent? Could you do that, please? Have you ever written a book about this? Have you ever? And just to be asked that repeatedly, when I read The Lodge, I thought, well, that was true enough of me. I thought you showed you were interested in life by writing stories about sex and stories about, with plot, how important the plot is. I really couldn't care less about the plot particularly now. It's the sensations and the feelings and the things it gives out about what is important in life that drives me in literature.
The Irish writer Claire Keegan said that she's driven her stories, the engine, if you like, is the thing that happens after the thing that happened. Which I thought was a wonderful kind of notion. That's the thing that drives, that compels her to write, I suppose. And I wondered if you could say, both in your stories and in your longer fiction and anti-fiction, what the thing that drives you is beyond, you know, the topic, say, of motherhood or children. What are you trying to get at is the question, I suppose.
So what it feels like, it's always been what it feels like. Right from the very first book, I knew that what I was trying to do was write down what something felt like. And it was partly, I think naively, I thought this was a kind of exorcism. If you wrote about stuff, you could maybe get rid of it. And I know an awful lot of people talk about writing being therapy, and I've always kind of looked down my nose at that kind of thing, saying, no, it's actually a lot about discipline, and it's a lot about reading, and it's a lot about craft, and it's a lot about just doing the damn thing, no matter how slow a writer you are, and I'm a very slow writer. But it's not therapy, but at the same time, you can't avoid, it's one of the few things that, oh, this is a tragic thing to say, makes me feel fully alive. Because I was talking to someone today who's asking me for advice about the first book she's writing. And the number of times I used the word feel. She actually drew me up at one point and she said, can't they ever talk to each other? Yes, they can talk to each other. But at the same time, your reader is always there. There's always a ghost in the machine. And you're there. There are two ghosts in the machine. And you're the two who are actually having the conversation. These people are here to transfer how that woman feels right at this moment, how that guy sees her now, how that man over there has maybe spotted part of it but not all of it, and what he's gone away thinking, how those two women who've been watching them out a window have got entirely the wrong head with the. It's all about complication and feeling the thing. And if you can get it, I've always had this thing about, see, I'm doing this now, I act very badly when I'm writing. There's only so long that's interesting. And then you start thinking, she's really nervous and she's turning a tap on, how do you do that? Terrible hammy acting. No, that's too quick. Do it again. Maybe your hand's wet. Okay, I'm going to get my hand wet and do all this kind of thing. I suppose it's partly to keep myself amused, because those of you who write books will know what an incredibly dull process it can be, especially with rewriting.
It's like method writing, though.
Yeah, it's method writing, and it's about feeling. I want the reader to feel something that will make them take charge of the story and recognise something in it that belongs to them, even if the story has nothing to do with them whatsoever. I think that's what I'm after.
To come back to that idea of exorcism, though, Kevin Barry said, this Irish writer Kevin Barry bought a Sligo barracks an old Garda barracks, and he said it kind of reeked of old dead sergeants and so on, and he said he knew they'd sneak into his work somewhere or other. I wonder if there are things that you feel that if you return to again and again, do you feel you write them out? Or do they keep sneaking back in whether you like it or not?
They keep sneaking back in, but they alter. Now, no, I find it hard to think there are any people whose writing stays the same. You probably read more widely than I do, so maybe you would have a handle on that kind of a thing. Maybe there are people whose writing never alters very much, not with the years or with their own experiences or with changing times. But I think most writers, there is a process of, it's not even maturing, it's just about taking certain things in that you maybe hadn't spotted before, or getting rid of something that you put too much focus on before, and now you're seeing something else. And that ought to happen in your writing, because if your brain's not working, it's highly unlikely you're going to make enough money to keep writing at all. You know, your brain has to work all the time. Your eyes have to see all the time. Your ears have to hear all the time. And because you're taking that in constantly, it's shifting. And then, of course, it's also zeitgeist. What do things shift with? I mean, some of the things I'm seeing on television at the moment, I have a friend who, my generation were the kind of first teenage lot through the advent of AIDS. And they put scary adverts on television. There was a big tombstone that had sex is dangerous. Somebody had to tell us, you know. I think it's this big tombstone thing. And to look at what's happening now, and for this to be a talking point, and for the whole gender thing that seems to have gone crazy, quite wild, to the point where I almost can't keep up with it. But I'm watching it as belonging to another generation. This is something else that's being worked through. And maybe when you guys are my age or whatever, something else that has come along will fascinate you in a kind of detached way, because it's not the thing you're actually living through for the time being. But you will certainly notice, and it will impinge on the consciousness of what you think the present generation are about. If you've lost an interest in people who are a different age to you, really, come on. You know? You guys, for all I know, are going out to discos and nights. That's what I imagine you are doing.
We're all going out.
Come too. So what I have to do is cultivate friends who are younger and actually find out what people are doing. Kids are, that's another reason why kids are great. Kids don't half tell you that you're a boring old shit quite a lot. That's a very interesting thing. I recommend kids. Not immediately.
Speaking of changing though, I did want to ask you about the person who wrote The Trick is to Keep Breathing, and the person who's now written, you know, numerous books and won lots of things. What's changed do you think your style has significantly changed? Have your...
Yeah.
Who was that person?
I'm not a critic, but that isn't part of my job. I don't have to look at the next thing. It's funny that people always ask me questions that are for critics, like, are you any use? And stuff like that. That's not my job.
Necessarily how do you think your work's got better? I just wonder if, you know, the decision to write a sort of anti-memoir non-fiction two pieces, a bit of poetry, lots of collaborations, I just wonder how much that was planned? Do you plan?
No, I bore easy. I bore incredibly easily, and I have to keep moving things around. I also write very, very slowly. So halfway through a novel, I'll think, oh, for God's sake, if I don't write a short story, I'm going to shoot myself. You know, there's a kind of hiatus that you reach in a book. You know that way when you're halfway through a book and you think, I really have to get run over by a car now because I don't know what happens now. And I will be too embarrassed to say. But I am a very slow writer and quite an unconfident writer. And I think, therefore, you don't appraise it. You just, once it's finished, there has been such a drive to get this visceral thing so that people feel it. You think, well, that's as good as I can do it right now, and I could write it forever. But I'm bored already. So maybe the best thing to do is see if anybody will publish this, and it'll go out and it'll do what it does, and people will do their own thing with it, and then you do something else. And they always used to, this is an interesting point in my life to ask me this question, they always used to announce themselves by stealth. Because I'm a lousy, rotten sleeper, and you'd wake up and you've got to do something. You know, there's only so much, I don't know, comedy programmes you can listen to on the radio, and then they're not funny. And what you have to do is kind of get something out. I used to write down notes, and invariably they would tell me whether this is a short story, right? go and finish it. But if I've written one short story, how don't I write it? Why don't I? You know, there would be, they tended to phase themselves in and out of what you came to. The anti-memoirs, as it were. I didn't know I was writing about me. It's not about me, but the writing came out of me, if you see what I mean. I didn't realise that that was about me and my mother and my sister until somebody said, you know that sister that I heard you talking about? That woman sounds every bit as dreadful as you have made your sister sound when you have spoken to me. And I thought, yeah. And I realised that's who it was. Then what you can do is you can own it. They kind of escaped. They kind of got out. And then what you have to do is own it and turn it into a something. You can't write down people. What you're writing down is words. Why you write down the words as best you can, and as clearly as you can, and with as much feeling as you can, is so somebody else can come along, own these people you made up and say, I know somebody like that, and then they've got the picture in their head. It's yours. I don't believe there is any such thing as a writer who should be able to say, you've got that wrong. I know what that book is about because I wrote it. You don't. You know what it's about for you. The whole point is to give you something that you can take and make into something that you recognise. So there needs to be enough room for that. And I guess, therefore, I've never really kept up with where I think they're coming from. They've sort of surprised me. Recently, the book I'm working on now, there's a misnomer. The book I'm working on now is taking forever. Because it was an idea that was put to me by somebody who said, I would like you to do this. Do you think you could? And I thought, yeah, I think I can. I'm not that sure now. But it's a whole different process altogether. But again, one of the great things about having a long writing career is realising that there are all sorts of different selves in there who are going to come up out of the pop-up box every so often. It's not the same person who keeps coming up, and it's not the same perspective that keeps coming up. And almost every book I've ever written, I've had to learn to write another way. I suppose that's because I bore easily. I want to keep learning it. I'm less keen on learning this lesson. Whatever this lesson is I'm learning at the moment, but I will learn it.
Why do you think it's taking so long? Is it a novel? It's a novel?
Yeah.
Yeah. that's our lot. It's a novel and I'm saying no more.
It's a novel about 18th century singing culture, which is not 18th century singing culture at all. If anybody contemporary writes a book of the 18th century, it's not really about the 18th century, is it? It's about now, and therefore, I was watching, kids, this is confession time. I used to watch The X Factor. I'm sorry, but there we are. I used to watch The X Factor. And it was with my mouth open, like you watch a horror movie. And there's the places awash with blood, and you wonder just how much more awful it can be. Watching these largely kids sacrificing themselves on the altar of Simon Cowell's vanity, and looking for people that he could manufacture into other folk, change their clothes, to actually change it. Do you remember a young guy called Ridian? He was actually an opera singer, and they made him run about in a fur coat, singing songs by Pink. And I thought, and it's because he knew he couldn't, giving this guy a career as an opera singer, doesn't make money for Simon Cowell. What you do is you make them into something you can use. And it horrified me more and more. Now, being a good girl and having studied my music at school, my music teacher saved my life. I owe a great deal to what is often called classical music, but it was just, as far as I'm concerned, another facet of music, which takes in all sorts of things. There are folk songs inside it, there are popular songs in particular, there is everything inside it. And I thought, actually, there were a group of boys called castrati, and they became very important. The castrato singer was someone who had been castrated as a boy before puberty began to set in, so that he developed the voice of a soprano. It never broke, so he had a very high voice, which was thrilling, but he had the chest cavity of a man. So what you've got is the highest, weirdest, most kind of, whoa, what's that, kind of a voice you ever heard in your life. And it worked. It packed people into theatres, it packed people into opera, and they were always the heroes, bizarrely, the romantic heroes. Now there's an irony. They were always the romantic heroes, or the gods, or the forlorn sons, and sometimes they played women too. So there was a whole kind of interesting gender career in that. In public, you were a social pariah, you were a misfit, you were something to laugh at. And you could be detected, because as these boys grew, because the suppressive hormones weren't there, they kept growing. Castrati tended to be 6 inches taller than other men, because the bone structure just didn't know when to stop. They tended to develop barrel chests from all the years and years of singing. An apprenticeship was 7 to 12 years, beginning at the age of 10. These were extraordinary people. And I thought, actually, but at least they got good music written for them. And they had a career that they chose. They had a career that they chose as they went forward. 90% of them didn't make it, which is what reminded me of the X Factor. Now what they did is what this novel is about. See, you knew I'd get there sooner or later.
You didn't say why it's taken you long though. I mean, is it that you get excited by details and often a wormhole somewhere else? YouTube? I don't know.
No, I lose... I sounded like you were calling me a tube. Which is an insult I've not heard for decades.
Oh, it's a great one, YouTube.
No, it's because I lose confidence. If you take a long time to write something, again, I know a lot of you will write things. If you take a long time to write something, you lose the confidence that you're interesting. I do. Well, one loses the confidence. I lose the confidence that it's being interesting. And I keep thinking, well, if it's taken this long to write, is this natural to me? Should this be what I'm writing at all? So I'm in the middle of a great slough of despond at the moment. With luck, it'll go away. The same thing happened with Clara, which was the previous historical novel. Because I'm not 100% I can't let my head loose on contemporary culture in the way I can. I have to filter contemporary culture through something else, and that has to be accurate. Therefore, you're very self-critical because you're having to deal with historical fact. And since there is no such thing really as historical fact, you know, every few years we actually find out that wasn't the case at all. It was something else that was that, you know, or that thing that we thought was a Roman helmet is actually a thing to wash your face in. And there's always something that you're finding out that makes nonsense of the facts, you know, and that's what slows me down.
How do stories play a role in that process then, do they? I mean, in terms of your process, are you working on several things? Any you said you get bored easily and so on. Are you working on other things alongside something like the novel? Do you continue to turn back to stories as a way to shove things along?
The thing I go back to most is working with sculptors and photographers. And I mean, anybody basically, you know, if you've got a hobby and you can pay me to write poetry, I'm available. Because you've got somebody else to spark off. The rottennest thing about being a writer is that you're usually all on your own. You know, you can't even phone somebody up, because why would they care? You know, they've got their own life to lead. So you're kind of stuck with it. But whereas if you're working with someone, you can say, I wrote these words, but I don't think they're right. What do you think? I said, yeah, well, I mean, that line's crap and that's that. Wait till I show you another picture and you say, oh, right, I see what I should be writing about now. And that chance to collaborate is an extraordinary thing. For those of you who are writers, if you've never done it, give it a shot. I mean, seriously, to have another head in there giving you the confidence that, yeah, I mean, you're onto something there, but nah, not at the end. It's like a gift from the gods, you know? Someone else is helping you. And that's just an extraordinary thing. So my favourite thing is that. And that's what I tend to do in the times between. If I can collar Callum Colvin, for example, and say, oh, come on, Callum, you must not wait to write some words. You must. You know? He'll think whether he can. And at the moment I've been writing something with a sculptor called Anne Bevan that I've worked with 3 times before, who's just, genius. And inspires me all the time. That's fun.
So who are your first readers then, if you're working alone on a novel, say? How do you know it's cooked?
You don't. The first reader and last reader for a long time was always just me. I didn't show my work to anybody. This again is an inheritance from childhood. Those of you who are more my age, there are very few of you in here tonight, there's some of you who are more my age. I'm from the generation of, you know, go away hen, away and play. I was of the go away hen generation. It's not outside, away outside and play snowballs. And that kind of thing. You know, there was always something that you had to do that meant, get away, leave, nobody's interested in what you're doing. And you say, look what I made, that's lovely, hen. You know, it was never of any interest to anybody. And the excitement of finding somebody being interested in your work, and that was even a viability. I think I became someone who wrote alone because I was alone so much, and I thought that was what you did. There'll be writers in here who still think that's what you do. No, there are much more exciting things to do with your life than stay in a room by yourself making stuff up. There are many things to do with life. And I didn't really cotton on to working with people. Therefore, I thought I was entirely alone. And what a cheek it would have been. You know, if I'd like approached you standing at a bus stop and said, I'm writing this novel, do you want to do it? I mean, the right answer would have been, I don't think so. Actually, I have a life. You know, that kind of thing. I thought it was rude to ask people. And I was fortunate enough to meet Peter Kravitz, who basically started this kind of the so-called Scottish Renaissance writing that took place in the 90s. Just because he went about saying to people, somebody told me you write stories, do you?
And at parties, he just appeared at a party. And
no, he would go to the Third Eye Centre. Those of you who do not remember the Third Eye Centre, it was where you went, you could sit with carrot salad all day, one portion, and they would give you free coffee the entire time you were in there. And the art students came in and made you feel dead arty, you know, because you were hanging out and rubbing shoulders with the arty crowd. And it was, I used to write stories, and he went there. How perspicacious is that? It was full of skint right. Living on one cup of coffee and a shared carrot salad. And art students would come in and say, what's that you're doing? And I thought it was an art student, because he came in and said, what's that? And I said, I think it's a story, but I don't know. And he said, can I read it? And I said, well, I'll go and get us both a coffee. You can read it if you like. And when I came back, he said, I'll give you 25 quid for it. I edit a magazine. I'm not daft. Show me the 25 quid. And promised him I would finish it. And then he said, have you got any more? And I lied and I said, yeah, sure. I said, how many have you got? 6. That's a good number. Can you send them all? So then I had to write 6 stories very fast. And it was basically a series of happy accidents. And God bless Peter Kravitz. I send Kravitz a Christmas card every year, which he doesn't care about because he's Jewish. But I send him a Christmas card every year that says, thank you for starting me in this job. You may not get one this year with the carry on I'm having with the present novel, but it was an extraordinary chance. You need to hang about in places where surprise people might turn up.
I think we should have some questions, comments. Oh, brilliant, thank you. Yes?
Just right on the very last point you made about chance, given that, you know, iPhones, iPads, tons of technology around us influences and just informs and interrupts the lives of lots of young artists today, do you actually think that chance happens in the same way, or less, or more so?
Depends how often you go on a bus.
Right.
You know, there are ways to meet people that I am au fait with because I am the age I am.
Right.
I never feel I'm meeting anybody on social media. I think there are a lot of people cutting through each other.
Mm.
You can keep in touch, you know, the kind of oldies idea of what Facebook is I'll do that because then I can talk to somebody that I met that I haven't seen for years and say what Facebook, and you can have a chat, do that kind of thing. And you can keep up with the kids, sort of a thing. But I've never seen it as a place where anyone is likely to get very interested in somebody's work. There are specific sites, however, which are, let's say, for writers. There are an awful lot of sites for writers. And what they can do is therefore do what we used to call networking. They can therefore meet each other and ask each other to read each other's work. The better thing to do is meet that way and then set up a physical meet. That matters hugely, because when you can see someone's face, you have such a motile face. You've been doing extraordinary things with your face the entire time I've been sitting here. I've been watching you react very much. And it's interesting because I'm starting to see maybe a kind of glimpse into that mattered to that guy, and oh, he didn't write that very much. I was interested in that. You know, you start to react to it. To be able to see people is the most important thing, especially for writers, because God knows the rest of it is lonely. The rest of it is boring and lonely. And I think that is the way in writing. And I don't see any reason why that would stop. But I don't think you're going to magically meet someone over the internet. What you can do in this day and age is you can get in touch with self-publishing in a way that you never could before. You can get Kindle, if you like, to publish single stories. You can publish an entire novel on Kindle and keep your fingers tight crossed that somebody who really likes it, or better still, thousands of people who really like it, will find it and buy it. And it does happen. But it's as rare as a castrato making the level of Fahrenheit. You know, it's rare.
Yes.
What have you found easier to write? Is it the non-fiction or memoir, or the fictional versions of people you've known?
I don't find anything particularly easy to write. I don't. It's a kind of self-torture. Stevie Smith, we were talking about Stevie Smith earlier on, who apparently wrote to keep herself sane. And I sometimes wonder if I'm trying to drive myself insane. It's just the opposite reason. Why have a happy life when you can be a writer? It's a kind of lashing yourself thing about it with me, especially because I work so slowly. And this is an age where we expect writers to work quick. Those of you who've been in contact with publishers recently will say, can you turn it around in 2 years? No, is the answer to that. No. But you being young will probably say, well, if I try really hard, no. Say no. Say it now after me. No. Practice it. You need to put the entire time you put into this, because it's there forever as a testament of something you thought was fit to give to other people. You've got yourself to look in the eye every morning. It's really important to take as long as it takes, and they've kind of lost that because now it's become a commodity. You know? You are a commodity. No, you're not. You're still a person, and you're one of the few who has still managed to find something to do by yourself and by and large ignore the rules if you've got the brazenness and the, shall we say, sheer financial lack of nous to do that. You can still do that. But goodness, it's a buzz. It's an extraordinary buzz. And there are ways to do it, and you can use social media to do it, and you can link up with other people like it, and you can write for pleasure, although the concept is a bit lost on me. You can write for pleasure, but the other thing you can do is once you start to take yourself seriously, I think there'd be very few people in this day and age who'd be advised to do it solely. I think there always were very few people who wrote solely. Johnson all his life wrote journalism. Kafka all his life was an accountant. You know, very, very few people have ever written solely. I think we've got an idea that we could do that from the massive advances of the 70s. That was a long time ago, folks. It's different now.
Changing. Anybody else? Another question? I would like to follow up on Stevie's. Oh no, we do have another one. Was that a hand?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, great.
Coming back to a couple of your points, the first one was that you desire to make people feel something when you write. You're concentrating on the feeling that you communicate through your words. And then later on you said that you want the person to, you want the space around those words to be such that the person can bring themselves into that. And when I've tried writing and shoved various pages to various pals, email it, this and that, it's perfectly clear. Everybody's got a completely different emotional reaction to what I write.
Good.
That is good, but then there's a balance, isn't there, which is almost impossible to predict. How much do you try to make somebody feel something, and how much do you give them space to feel something themselves so that they take ownership of your writing?
Oh, geez, it's not really conscious. It's not really conscious. I mean, I'm in danger of psychoanalyzing myself here, which I think is a kind of fruitless exercise, because you are who you are and you're asking for reasons that have nothing to do with my personal psychology. But since I own my personal psychology, one of the reasons why I write the way I do is to reassure myself that I can be heard. Mm-hmm. My mother she wasn't deaf, but she didn't listen. She was a single parent, she had an awful lot of stuff to do, and there was a constant nobody's listening thing going on with me. So I did the thing that kids that aren't really listened to did, and talked to myself, and basically that's what writing is. And sooner or later you will talk to yourself and wonder if anybody would read it if you would. It was that simple. I wrote my first novel at the age of 11, and my mother burnt it, thank God. She used it as kindling for the fire. I remember it was called The Normans Are Coming. And it was about the Norman invasion of England. God knows what I thought was interesting at the time. I have no idea. I think we were doing the Normans in history in primary 6 or some bloody thing. And I wrote a play and everything. And they were all like at home and their mums were making cardboard helmets for them out of cornflake packets. And I didn't finish it. Oh, that's a terrible story.
Is it a tragedy or a relief that it'll never come to light though? Like, was it Larkin's Juvenilia all got published against his sort of final wishes, you know? Is that good or bad? It's quite a sad story.
Awful.
It's tragic.
Awful. And you know, that happened. It's an excellent thing. And all the poems and all sorts of shit got burned because it never dawned on me you would have any use for them. Because the use for them was presumably the psychological need just to, it's kind of, you, I'm here. And that's why Stevie Smith speaks to me. Right? Nobody heard him, the dead man, but still early morning. I was much further out than he thought, but not waving, but drowning. Poor chap. He always loved larking and now he's dead. It must have been too cold for him. His heart gave way, they said. Oh no. No, it was too cold. Always. Still the dead one lay mourning. I was much further out than you thought. And not waving, but drowning. And I think there's a kind of writer who comes from there. That was a very serious answer.
I think if no one else has a final question, I've got a final. Oh, we do
Sorry.
have one. Brilliant. No, crack on.
I was just to say, you've talked quite a lot about how your ma would say to you, you know, nobody's listening or nobody's interested.
Okay.
So when you do win an award for a book or when something is really well received, is that then really nice or is that pressure?
It's pressure. The money part is lovely. The money, you smile a lot and you love people very, very much for giving you the means whereby you can do some more work. But then, of course, what it's always for, it's almost like you're paying your dues. I have been given money because of something I wrote. That must mean you owe it to do another book. And I think that's what's bothering me about this when I promised someone. And I think that's what's scaring the life out of me. I was 50 before I got married because I was scared of promising anything to anybody because that was an obligation and therefore it was something hard to live up to. What happened with the marriage is neither here nor there. It's still very successful, I'm glad to say, but there's an interesting thing about offering, just setting yourself up to write something. I wonder, do you ever feel this? That somehow you're saying, I have something worth saying. And you know that parrot on your shoulder that says, who do you think you are? It's usually got your mother's face, that parrot, you know? Or your dad's face, or a teacher's face, or something like that. Somebody saying, who do you think you are? Who wants to read this? You know, oh, come on. That sort of idea that you're kind of getting beyond your station is still in me because that used to be a very Scottish thing to feel. It used to be a very British thing to feel in general. If you listen to the life story of, for example, Dudley Moore, who worked with Peter Cook, all his life he was dogged by the feeling that he should be doing something that wasn't this, because surely anybody could do this. And then when he didn't have to do it, was it clever enough? Was he working on it cleverly enough? I think that's always been there, and it's important to try and get by that. So part of it, I think, has to be a sort of therapeutic thing. But I think self-reflection is therapeutic anyway. I don't think it's the act of writing. I don't think you take it on because you're aware you need therapy. You know? Prozac is quite cheap. You know, really, incredibly cheap. And it is so easy to get hold of, folks. You know? There are other things to do. It's a proper thing to do. It's a striving thing to do. But sometimes you shock yourself with your own audacity and that can slow you down. And that still crops up. It doesn't matter how many books you write. The question, it doesn't matter how many you write. Still something saying, oh, you think you can write another one? Do you? I wish I could find out who it was. I think it's my sister, actually.
Anybody else, or will I? Yeah. Just, Janice, back to Stevie Smith, who's become a kind of the spectre at the feast, as it were. And I love that you said about her work that she can tell you basically the most awful thing, and then she'll tell you something trivial, like, aren't cats fun, to make up for it, and that's basically life. And we were saying that we thought that Stevie would love Instagram and Twitter, basically, because there's loads of cats, but that wasn't the question. The question was just, you said you'd learned a lot from Stevie and how she modulated this kind of tragedy and humour. And I wonder if there was, we've learned a lot, I think, tonight about your process and tips and everything. But if there's one thing you would love someone here or online later or anywhere to take from your work that they could learn, what do you think it might be? Awful hard question.
Read Stevie Smith. The thing I would suggest, an awful lot of people have no idea who she is, and then are surprised it's a woman.
Her real name was Peggy.
Her real name was Peggy, which is yours.
That's
I'm
right.
going to start calling you Stevie.
There is a Stevie in the room, actually, yeah. I like her real Stevie.
To find someone who says something that really strikes such a chord with you that suddenly the whole thing is transparent. Sometimes you read something and there is no trouble getting what the poet is driving at. You just swallow it whole. It's the right food for you. You are a seal and someone has made the perfect fish. And it was down in the one. Stevie Smith was that for me. I think once you find something that is that transparent, it comes from reading other things. And you think, that feels like a friend. And if they did it, that's what gives you the confidence to have a go at it yourself. You don't think that they're stupid or doing something daft that they can't do. You realise they probably at some stage thought that was the person they were. And if they can do it, anyway,
If anyone has brought a book along, would like to get it signed. Janice, have you time to do a little spot of signing?
I find signing books much easier than writing.
Bit of signing. I'd like to remind you all, it'll be streamed. We're on Twitter, SCOTLITFEST, #SCOTLITFEST, @SCOTLITFEST. Feel free to tweet and all that. Tell your friends it's going to be streamed. Finally, thank you all very much for coming and joining us tonight and for your great questions. And thank you very much to Janice Galloway.
Thank you so much.